The alarm clock on the bedside table did not buzz. It rattled, a harsh, mechanical vibration that seemed to shake the very dust out of the floorboards. It was 3:30 in the morning, an hour that belongs neither to the night nor the day, but to the working men of McDowell County. Elias Thorne reached out a hand, his knuckles swollen and stiff from 20 years of gripping a shovel, and silenced the noise before it could wake his wife. Martha was sleeping on her side, her breathing rhythmic and soft, a stark contrast to the wheeze that lived permanently in Elias's own chest. He sat up on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning under his weight, and placed his feet on the cold linoleum floor. The cold was a shock, traveling up his legs, reminding him that the heat in the house was turned down low to save on the gas bill. He stood up slowly, his lower back protesting with a dull, familiar ache that never truly went away, no matter how many hot showers he took. In the hallway, the photos of his ancestors watched him in the gloom. His father, Silas, and his grandfather, Jeremiah. They were men made of grit and iron, men who had spent their lives digging the black rock out of these same mountains. Now it was Elias's turn. A legacy of soot passed down like a holy relic. The kitchen was silent, illuminated only by the pale blue light of the refrigerator and the glow of the street lamp outside the window. Elias moved through the motions of his morning ritual with the precision of a machine. He filled the percolator with water and spooned in the cheap, dark roast coffee that tasted like burnt earth but provided the kick he needed to face the shift. While the coffee brewed, filling the small house with its bitter aroma, Elias sat at the small, chipped formica table. In the center of the table lay a stack of envelopes, their corners curled. He didn't need to open them to know what they contained. The bank, the electric company, the pharmacy, they all wanted a piece of him that he didn't have to give. He looked at his hands, turning them over in the dim light. The coal dust was embedded so deep in the creases of his skin that no amount of scrubbing could remove it. It was like a tattoo, marking him as property of the Hollow Creek mine. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion settling into his bones before the day had even begun. The door to the back bedroom creaked open, and a teenage boy stumbled out, rubbing sleep from his eyes. It was Caleb, his 17-year-old son. Caleb was tall and lean, with the same sharp jawline as his father, but his hands were still soft, the hands of a boy who held pencils and books, not pickaxes and roof bolts. "Dad," Caleb whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "You leaving already?" Elias nodded, taking a sip of the scalding hot coffee. "Shift starts at 5, son. Got to beat the traffic up the hollow." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down, looking at the envelopes on the table. "I heard Mom talking on the phone yesterday." "Is it bad?" Elias sighed, the sound heavy in the quiet kitchen. He reached out and covered the bills with his calloused hand. "Don't you worry about this. Your job is to finish high school and get those grades up. You're going to college, Caleb. You're going to get a job in an office with air conditioning, somewhere the sun shines every day." Caleb looked down at his feet. "I could pick up some shifts at the garage, or Big Jim said they're hiring summer help at the tipple." Elias slammed his mug down, a little harder than he intended. Coffee sloshed over the rim. "No, you stay away from that mine. You hear me? You don't step foot on that property unless you're driving past it to get out of this town." The boy went silent, nodding slowly. Elias softened his expression. He stood up and squeezed his son's shoulder. "I do this so you don't have to. Remember that." He finished his coffee in one long gulp, grabbed his tin lunch pail from the counter, and headed for the door. The air outside was crisp and smelled of damp leaves and sulfur. The drive to the mine was a solitary pilgrimage. Elias's old Ford truck rattled over the potholes of the winding mountain roads. The headlights cut through the thick Appalachian fog that clung to the valleys like a shroud. He passed the skeletons of old tipples and the rusted remains of conveyors, ghosts of a booming past that was long gone. When he arrived at the Hollow Creek site, the gravel lot was already filling up. Men in denim and flannel moved like shadows, their heads down, cigarettes glowing like fireflies in the dark. The air here was different, heavier, tasting of diesel fumes and pulverized rock. This was a world apart, a kingdom with its own laws and its own dangers. Inside the bathhouse, the mood was somber. Lockers clanged shut, and the sound of zippers and boots on concrete echoed off the tiled walls. Elias stripped off his street clothes and pulled on his work gear. Gray coveralls, stained black, steel-toed rubber boots, and a wide leather belt that held his battery pack and self-respect. He saw Big Jim Holloway, the shift foreman, standing by the bulletin board. Big Jim was a man the size of a vending machine, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. "Morning, Elias." Jim grunted, not making eye contact. "We're in Section 4 today. The retreat mining. We need to pull those last pillars before the weekend." Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Retreat mining was the most dangerous work there was. It meant carving out the pillars of coal that held the roof up, letting the mountain collapse behind you as you backed out. It was a game of chicken with gravity, and Section 4 was known for having a bad top, unstable sandstone that liked to crack without warning. "Jim, that roof in 4 was groaning 3 days ago," Elias said, keeping his voice low. "Them timbers were bowing like distinct bows. Is it safe to go back in there so soon?" Jim turned, his eyes hard. "Corporate wants the tonnage, Elias. The price is up. We get that coal out, or they shut the section down. You want to tell the boys they're out of a job?" It was the ultimate weapon, the threat of unemployment that hung over their heads like a guillotine. Elias tightened his jaw and nodded. "All right, but we need extra cribbing. I'm not sending my crew in there without more support." Jim nodded curtly. "You'll get your wood. Just get the coal." The cage ride down was a sensory assault. 30 men packed shoulder to shoulder in a rattling metal elevator, descending into the throat of the earth. The air pressure changed, popping their ears. The light from the surface grew smaller and smaller until it vanished completely, replaced by the artificial glow of their cap lamps. 800 feet down, the cage shuddered to a halt. The gate opened, revealing the main haulage way. It was a tunnel carved through solid rock, the walls glistening with rock, dust-white powder sprayed to keep the coal dust from exploding. The smell was overpowering. The damp, musty scent of ancient earth mixed with the sharp tang of ozone and machinery. Elias climbed into the man-trip, a low-slung rail car that would take them 3 miles back to the working face. The ride was jarring, the metal wheels screeching against the tracks. He looked at the men around him. There was young Tommy, only 22, with a new baby at home. There was Preacher Miller, who read his Bible during lunch breaks. They were good men, hard men. They trusted Elias with their lives, and he carried that responsibility like a physical weight on his shoulders. As the man-trip rattled deeper into the darkness, Elias touched the picture of Martha and Caleb he kept tucked inside his helmet liner. Just one more shift, he told himself. Just get through today. Section 4 was a cramped, hostile environment. The ceiling, or top, was only 48 inches high here. Elias and his crew had to work on their knees or stooped over in a permanent hunch. The continuous miner, a massive machine with a rotating drum of steel teeth, roared to life, its noise deafening in the confined space. The machine tore into the coal seam, ripping the black gold from the earth. Dust filled the air instantly, a thick, choking cloud that reduced visibility to a few feet. The ventilation fans hummed, trying to suck the dust away, but it was never enough. Elias tasted the grit between his teeth. He felt it clogging his nose. For hours, they worked in a rhythm born of years of practice. The miner cut, the shuttle cars hauled, the roof bolters drilled. It was a brutal, industrial ballet. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling of dread. He kept his eyes on the roof, watching for the telltale signs of stress. Small flakes of rock falling, the kettle bottoms that could drop like anvils. Around noon, they stopped for a brief lunch. The men sat with their backs against the ribs of coal, their cap lamps turned off to save battery, eating sandwiches in the absolute, crushing darkness. Awful quiet today, Preacher whispered. Usually, the mountain talks more when we're pulling pillars. Elias turned his lamp on, the beam cutting through the blackness. It's waiting, he said, half to himself. The mountain is holding its breath. He shone his light on the wooden timbers they had set earlier. One of them, a 6-inch oak post, was already splintering under the pressure. The squeeze was on. All right, boys. Listen up, Elias said, his voice cutting through the silence. We take it slow. We take deep cuts. But we watch that top. If you hear anything at all, you drop everything and run for the man-trip. No heroes today. The men nodded, their faces smeared with grime, their eyes wide and white in the lamplight. They went back to work. The continuous miner roared again, biting into the final pillar of the section. This was the keystone, the block of coal that was holding up millions of tons of rock above their heads. As the machine chewed away the support, the groans began. Deep, guttural thuds echoed through the rock layers, sounding like thunder trapped underground. Elias stood back by the breaker line, the point of safety, watching Tommy operate the remote control for the miner. Easy, Tommy! Easy! Elias shouted over the roar. Back it out now. That's enough. Tommy nodded and reversed the controls. The massive machine began to retreat, its tracks clanking. Suddenly, a sound ripped through the air, a sharp, high-pitched crack like a rifle shot, followed by a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the soles of their boots. The air pressure spiked instantly, popping their ears violently. Roof coming down, Elias screamed, waving his light frantically. Move! 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 The men scrambled, dropping their tools, scrambling on hands and knees through the low clearance. Dust billowed out as the ceiling behind them began to disintegrate. Massive slabs of sandstone, the size of school buses, detached from the earth and crashed down, crushing the continuous miner as if it were a toy. Elias grabbed Tommy by the back of his belt and hauled him backward just as a curtain of rock slammed down where the boy had been standing a second before. The noise was apocalyptic, a roar, so loud it wasn't heard, but felt. The wind generated by the collapse knocked them all flat against the jagged floor. Then, silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. The dust swirled thick and heavy, blinding them even with their lights on. Elias coughed, spitting out mud. "Sound off!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Who's hurt?" "Sound off!" One by one, voices called out from the haze. "I'm here. I'm good. My leg. I think I twisted my leg." Elias did a head count. 7 men, all alive. But as the dust began to settle, the beam of his light revealed their reality. Behind them was the collapsed section. In front of them, where the escape route should have been, was a wall of rubble. The shockwave had brought down the roof in the haulageway. They were sealed in. "Oh God," Preacher whispered, his voice trembling. "We're trapped." Panic began to rise in the small chamber, a palpable energy that could turn deadly. Men started to shout, rushing at the wall of rock, clawing at it with their bare hands. "Stop it!" Elias roared, grabbing the nearest man and shaking him. "Stop! You'll use up the air." He forced them to sit down. "Check yourself, rescuers. Check your water. We are alive. We are unearthed. The main line knows we're here. Big Jim knows we're here. They are coming for us." He tried to sound confident, but inside, Elias felt a cold terror gripping his heart. He knew the geology. He knew how much rock was between them and the world. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. Time loses its meaning in the dark. They huddled together for warmth, the temperature dropping as the ventilation stopped. The air grew stale, heavy with carbon dioxide. Elias turned off his lamp to save the battery. Sitting in the absolute blackness. In the dark, the mind plays tricks. Elias closed his eyes and saw his kitchen. He saw the bills on the table. He saw Martha's face, the worry lines around her eyes. He saw Caleb. "I promised him," Elias thought. "I promised him I'd get him out of here. If I die in this hole, the insurance money, maybe that gets him to college." The thought was a dark comfort. He imagined his own funeral, the closed casket, the flag draped over it. He wondered if he had enough life insurance to cover the house and the school. It was a grim calculation, the arithmetic of a miner's life. His value was higher dead than alive. Elias, it was Tommy's voice, small and frightened in the dark. "Do you think they can hear us?" Elias reached out and found the boy's shoulder. "They can hear us. Son, they're drilling right now." Primera cae fil italiano. He couldn't feel anything, but he couldn't let the boy lose hope. Hope was the only oxygen they had left. Above, Grund. The scene was chaos controlled by protocol. The mine sirens had wailed across the valley, a mournful sound that froze the blood of every wife and mother in the county. Martha was at the grocery store when she heard it. She dropped a gallon of milk, the white plastic bursting on the floor, and ran to her car without a word. The gates of the Hollow Creek mine were swarming with state police, ambulances, and the mine rescue teams. Families gathered by the chain-link fence, clutching blankets and rosaries. Martha stood near the front, her hands gripping the cold metal until her fingers turned white. Caleb stood beside her, his face pale, looking at the mountain that had swallowed his father. "Big Jim," Martha shouted as the foreman walked past. "Where are they? Where is he?" Jim stopped, his face gray with ash and stress. He took off his hard hat, twisting it in his massive hands. "They're in 4. Martha, behind a fall. We've got the seismic sensors set up. We heard tapping. They're alive." "Tapping," she whispered. It was the Morse code of the underground. A hammer against a roof bolt. Clang, clang, clang. 3 hits. "We are here." The waiting was the torture. The sun went down, casting long shadows over the valley, but the floodlights at the mine turned night into a harsh, artificial day. Underground, the air was getting thin. Preacher was leading the men in a quiet prayer. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, ... Double quotes. Elias didn't pray. He conserved his energy. He sat against a coal rib, tapping on a roof bolt with a wrench. Rhythmic, steady. He thought about the day he met Martha at the county fair. He thought about the smell of rain on hot asphalt. He started to hallucinate. He saw his grandfather sitting across from him, smoking a pipe. "Hard seam, ain't it, Eli?" the old ghost seemed to say. "Always takes a toll. Blood for coal." Elias shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. "Not today, old man," he muttered. "Not today." Then a sound, not a hallucination, a vibration. A low hum that grew louder. It was coming from the roof. "The drill." Elias clicked his light on. "Listen," he rasped. The men went silent. The hum grew into a grind, the sound of metal biting into rock. It was the most beautiful sound Elias had ever heard. "They're coming," Tommy cried out, tears streaming down his face. "They found us." The drill bit broke through the ceiling an hour later. A small 6-inch hole. Fresh air hissed into the chamber. Sweet and cold. A communication line was dropped down. Elias grabbed the microphone. "7 men," he croaked. "All accounted for. We're hungry, and we're mad as hell." The relief that washed over them was physical, leaving them weak and trembling. But the rescue wasn't over. They had to wait for the rescue capsule, the pod, to be lowered down a larger shaft. It took another 12 hours. 12 hours of sitting in the debris, sharing the last sips of water, telling jokes to keep from crying. When the capsule finally arrived, it was a tight squeeze. They went up one by one, injured first, oldest last. That was the rule. Elias waited until every other man was in the cage. He stood alone in the crushed section for a moment, looking at the pile of rock that had almost been his tomb. He spat on the ground. "You didn't get me," he whispered to the mountain. The ascent was slow. The darkness gave way to gray, then to blinding white. When Elias emerged from the capsule, the air hit him like a physical blow. The noise of the crowd was overwhelming. Cheers, sobbing, applause. He stumbled out, his legs weak, his eyes squinting against the floodlights. And there she was. Martha broke through the police line, running toward him. She slammed into his chest, burying her face in his filthy coveralls, not caring about the grime. Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tight he thought he might break her. He felt Caleb's hand on his back. "Dad!" The boy choked out. "Dad!" Elias looked at his son. He saw the terror in the boy's eyes, the realization of what this life actually cost. "I'm okay," Elias said, his voice rough with coal dust and emotion. "I'm okay." He looked up at the night sky, seeing the stars for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. They looked different now. Sharper, brighter. The aftermath was a blur of medical checks and news crews. Elias refused the stretcher. He walked to his truck, Martha and Caleb by his side. He drove them home, the silence in the cab, comfortable, heavy with gratitude. When they got to the house, Elias didn't go to bed. He went to the kitchen table. He sat down and looked at the bills again. They were still there. The debt hadn't disappeared just because the mountain collapsed. But something had changed. He picked up the envelope for the college savings account he had been trying to build for Caleb. It was almost empty. He looked at his hands, washed but still stained gray. He knew he would go back. He had to. There was no other work in McDowell County that paid enough to send a boy to university. He would go back into the dark so his son could walk in the light. Weeks later, the mine reopened. Section 4 was sealed off forever, a tomb of rock and memory. Elias stood at the elevator cage, his gear on, his light checked. The fear was there it would always be there now, but it was buried deep under layers of duty and love. He looked at the new guy standing next to him, a young kid looking nervous. Elias put a hand on the kid's shoulder. "Stay close to me," Elias said. "Watch the roof and listen to the mountain. She talks if you listen." The cage door clanged shut. Tibble rang, and Elias Thorne descended once again into the earth, a soldier in the unending war beneath the Blue Ridge, fighting for a future he might never see, but one he would build, ton by ton, shift by shift, until his lungs or his luck finally gave out. Because that is what miners do. They dig, they endure, and they carry the weight of the world on their backs, deep in the dark where the sun never shines, but where the heart beats the loudest.